Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about Texas and how I think 2024 might just be one of the most defining years in Texas football history. There's so much going into this year with hype and everything coming off a big time 2023, but can they execute will be a fantastic thing to watch this upcoming year. But let's get back into talking points around the Big Ten. I did not quite get what I wanted out of this yesterday, so wanted to continue today, and probably we'll move on to the SEC or maybe the Big 12 tomorrow, but we'll break that down later. But let's jump in, and I want to start with talking about Washington and Wisconsin because I weirdly feel like they're kind of in the same boat as they walk into a new Big Ten this year. And I think this is kind of it's the case for a lot of these teams, but especially these two teams, I think you find yourself kind of in a weird spot. Everyone's dubbing, Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. They're off in their own world. I think those are the four teams that everyone feels really good about being players for a long time in the Big Ten, and I fully agree with that. I think there's another group of teams. There's Nebraska, Iowa, USC, a couple others that have the chance to, be in that conversation up to towards the top or find their way back towards the bottom. It's another thing that I've talked about on here a lot where in these new big time power conferences, there's not going to be enough wins to go around. That's just the reality of the situation, and it could get sketchy for a couple of these teams, and Washington could be one of those teams. Now, Jed Fish had an absolutely magical run at Arizona a year ago, and I'm hoping that is going to continue because I think it's absolutely awesome to watch this guy call an offense. But at the end of the day, Kalen DeBoer left, and pretty much everyone did with him. There is not a lot returning for this team. They had to do a ton of work through the portal. Will Rogers, the guy that has to be going into about his 10th year in college football, is their starting quarterback this upcoming year, and there's a ton going into this year. But at the end of the day, this is a very talented team. There's no two ways about that, and a very capable program, as we saw a year ago. I think they have that ability to get to the Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State conversation. They also could be behind Nebraska, Iowa, USC if the next couple of years don't go the way that Washington wants it to go. So the landing is going to be maybe more important for Washington than any other team in the Big Ten. I think USC might be a little bit more important, but I do think Washington has a ton riding on this year. Just show that you belong. It doesn't necessarily have to be a great year. I'm not expecting 9, 10 wins, but if they can get to 8-4, even if they can get to 7-5 and prove that in some of those 5 games, you can hang around a little bit, I would feel pretty confident in them. But it's going to be a huge year for them, and the next couple are going to be fascinating to see just where they fit in this conversation. And then Wisconsin's another one. And I'm a little bit more bullish on Wisconsin because of Luke Fickell. I think he's one of the best coaches in the country, and I think he's done just incredible stuff since he's shown up in Madison. But at the end of the day, they're in the same boat. They're in a weird situation where Oregon comes in ahead of them. You could argue USC comes in ahead of them, and you have to figure out how to go about business. How are you going to kind of close that gap? And I think Luke Fickell's doing a fantastic job, but you only have so much time before a lot of these big-time schools find their footing. Oregon, Ohio State just run away with this conference. Maybe Michigan joins them. But at the end of the day, Wisconsin's in such an interesting position where if they can find their way past Nebraska this year, if they can find their way past Iowa and past USC this year, then I think they'll stay there. I think if this year doesn't go the way they want to and they lose to Nebraska and lose to Iowa and fall below USC in the rankings, it could get a little interesting. So Washington and Wisconsin are two teams that I'm just watching a little bit closer this upcoming year. Not necessarily, writing big-time conclusions off this year, but all to say, this is a huge year for these teams to figure out just where they sit. So it'll be interesting to see which UW is sitting on a higher pedestal moving forward in this conference, because I think those might be the two that are really fighting for that spot. But let's get into some lower level teams that could play spoiler this upcoming year, because I think there's a good bit of them, honestly. And I want to start with Indiana. There's a couple that stand out above the pack, about 3 that I'll get into, but Indiana is the number one. And I think it's Kurt Cignetti. He came into this program that, frankly, was just not that interesting of a program. With all due respect to all the Hoosiers out there, it was a program that just didn't have a lot of juice over the last couple of years, and obviously the Michael Penix year that feels like it was ages ago at this point, was fantastic. But the talent level is as high today as it was back then. He is doing really, really incredible things through the portal. Adding a guy like CJ West is huge. There were so many big-time teams after him, and it was not easy to reel that guy in. But getting him from Kent State is going to be a huge addition. Also, having moving on a little bit too quickly here. But I do think Indiana has a ton riding on this, or a ton going into the season. And I think everything is just moving in the right direction. I saw a picture of Julian Lewis wearing an Indiana shirt a couple of days ago. If he flips to Indiana, that will be the greatest recruitment anyone has ever pulled off. And I'm not even exaggerating. It will be absolutely remarkable. But the other team that I'm watching is Rutgers. I think Rutgers has been a little bit under the radar, but they're doing incredible things on the recruiting trail. Greg Schiano has done a great job building out the foundation of this program and then showing everyone what it is, which is you're not going to outright beat us. You are not going to come in and just bully us for 4 quarters. We are going to play tough, we're going to play physical, and we're not going to make life easy on you. And when you have a guy like Kyle Montague who runs the ball the way he does, it helps a lot. I won't argue with that, but I do think everything is heading in the right direction. Everything feels like it's just the momentum around there is just a little bit different than it was before. And I'm not saying they're going to, jump into the big time conversation this year, but they absolutely could play some spoiler for some of the big guys up top. And then Michigan State is the other one that I'm watching in particular. Jonathan Smith bringing in what's going to be, I think, a really, really successful program. But the biggest thing more than anything that he is bringing in that's important to Michigan State is stability. They never had it when Mel Tucker was in town for a number of different reasons, but at the end of the day, bringing stability, bringing a comfort level for some of these fans is huge. And I think also, like we talked about with Rutgers, having a guy like Aiden Childs to start this thing off and have a kind of a launch pad for this program under Jonathan Smith is absolutely huge. So very, very much expect a huge season from them. Cannot wait for that. And then let's get into Michigan. They're kind of under the radar, and I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but they are coming off a national title, so much going into this year, but Ohio State, Oregon are dominating the conversation when you talk about the Big Ten, and frankly, I think it's one very simple reason. Harbaugh's not there anymore. I think if Harbaugh was there, we'd be hearing so much more about the off-field stuff, about the Connor Stallions, about the recruiting violations, about everything in between about Michigan, and they wouldn't be flying as under the radar. But I think with all of the changes out there, roster included, it's kind of taken a little bit of the shine away from them. But doesn't mean they can't be successful. And frankly, I think they like not being focused on, if I'm being totally honest. I think that's the way that they go about business. They like working in darkness and then just showing up on Saturday and kicking your teeth in. That's the way that they like to play football. So I think while Oregon and Ohio State, in my opinion, are the best teams in this conference, I do think Michigan is a team that might just be overlooked just a little bit and might be able to prove us wrong. If Alex Orji comes along the way that they hope he will, this is a really good team with a really high floor and another team that's just not going to let you beat them. They're going to run the ball, they're going to play good defense, and they're going to just wear you down. So it'll be fascinating to watch how that kind of moves into the season because I just don't think people are talking about Clemson and Jerome Moore just quite enough. I think we have to hear about them just a little bit more as we head further and further into this season because they hold a little bit more power than I think some people are expecting them. But at the end of the day, we'll find out once the ball kicks off. And then finally, I want to talk about this game because I think we could see this game more than one time. I think we could see this game more than 2 times this upcoming season. Ohio State and Oregon is one of the most anticipated games going into this season. That game in Eugene is just going to be incredible. It's going to be one of the most defining games this upcoming season, one of the most fun, and right up there with Texas and Georgia in terms of the hype going into that one. But at the end of the day, I think these two could meet plenty of times throughout the season, to be totally honest. This is the reality of the new non-division format where if you play Oregon one time or if you play, this could happen with Michigan and Ohio State, absolutely, where you don't no longer have divisions. You're no longer split up. So you could play a team twice that you already played earlier in the season, and you could play Michigan again right after you just played them. So that would be a very interesting thing. But Oregon, Ohio State is the one that I tend to believe has the best path to meet multiple times. Florida State Clemson is the other one that I think is really definitely has a chance of this happening and will be fascinating to watch. But this one's going to be huge because I could see both these teams walking into this game undefeated. I could see both of them walking out of this game, one loss, but going 11-1, the other one going 12-0, meeting up in Indianapolis and see what happens from there. Then you have two 12-1 teams. One is likely the 1 seed overall, one's likely the 5 seed, and then they might face off again. So it would be incredible to watch all of this unfold, but it's the reality of the 12-team playoffs. Some people hate it. I tend to believe that as long as the two teams that are meant to be playing each other are playing each other in terms of seeding and difficulty, I'm more than fine. I would watch this game 13 times in a row if that's what needed to happen for the right national champion to be decided. I got no problem with that. So I understand that this is one that people kind of have some mixed opinions on, but overall, anytime that I can see two of these top programs go at each other, I have no problem with that. So will be awesome to watch that. Cannot wait to see some of the games that we get to see this upcoming year. But let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about some freshmen. I want to get into the freshman the freshman players for all of the contenders across every conference. We're going to start today in the SEC. I think we have 9 teams here that I think are contenders, quote unquote. Some are a little bit lower than others, but at the end of the day, want to break down some first-year guys that I think are just going to have huge impacts for them. So we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us.